July because that's a special weekend, but I will be back for it the following Sunday. So help us remind people of that if you speak with them. We are in St. John chapter 7. We're going to begin with verse 11. 7:11. John. Now, Jesus has decided to go down to Jerusalem. This is the Feast of Tabernacles, we will learn. And that is late September on our calendar, or sometimes early October, depending on the phase of the moon and so forth. So it's getting a little chilly. Jerusalem's on about the same latitude as Atlanta, Georgia. Not really chilly, just that autumn coolness coming in. Jesus is probably going to remain in Jerusalem or around Judea until the Feast of the Rededication, also called Hanukkah, which corresponds with our Christmas. So he's going to be there for 3 months without going back up to Galilee. And if he does go back up to Galilee during that time, we're not told of it in any of the 4 Gospels. So this begins a period where he is in Jerusalem area the longest we ever see him down there without going back up north through Samaria and Galilee. And because he's there, let me just remind you about Jerusalem Jews of the time. 500 years later, all of the temple had been destroyed by the Babylonians, and all of the populace virtually of Judea had been carried away to Babylon for 70 years. In 70 years' time, those people had buried their families in Babylon. They had purchased land. They had opened businesses, and they had farmed. They were now under the Persian rule. And when the 70 years were up, and guys like Ezekiel and Daniel and Ezra and Nehemiah and Zechariah, by the way, was publishing tracts to all the Jews that were scattered all over the former Babylon Empire, and now many of them, like Esther, were way out in Persia, like Esther and Mordecai. And so these prophets were sending tracts out. Some of the latter chapters of Ezekiel were obviously, apparently, written to these Jews that had been scattered out. And some of Zechariah's work was calling them, come with us, we're allowed now. The year is 516 BC, 516 years before the traditional birth date of Christ. And we can come back and rebuild our temple and rebuild Jerusalem. And the Persian Emperor Cyrus has said that if we get enough families coming back and we can rebuild our nation, and we can appoint our own king. They even had a candidate to be the king now, a guy named Zerubbabel, a direct descendant of David's. And we can be given our autonomy to have our own nation again, if enough of you will come back. Well, most people didn't want to pull up roots. They were born and raised out there in Persia and Babylon, and all that Ezra and Nehemiah could get together were a little over 300 families. Of course, extended families amounted to several thousand people, but these family clans, let's put it that way, about 3,000 of them. In fact, the exact numbers are given in Ezra, how many came, but it never was enough to gain their autonomy as a nation again. They would continue to be a province of the Persian Empire and ruled by the Persian kings who would actually own Jerusalem and own the temple. And after the Persian Empire fell to Alexander the Great of the Greek Empire, the Greeks continued to overlord the Jews the same way. And after the Greek Empire subsided and the Romans took over in 1st century BC, before Christ, the Romans treated Judea the same way. So what about these 300 some odd clans that came back with Ezra beginning 516 BC, and they rebuilt the temple and then rebuilt with Nehemiah the city of Jerusalem? What about those people? Well, they banded themselves with Ezra and listened to him read the law of Moses, and they raised their hands before Ezra and swore themselves under a curse to keep all of the law of Moses and not to allow their children or descendants to intermarry with any Gentiles. They developed, not all Jews everywhere, but this group of Jerusalem Jews, they developed a mentality about themselves that they were really the remnant that Isaiah had spoken of, and all other Jewish people were not really Jews, not in the sense that we are. And so 500 years later, we see Jesus' ministry, and Jewish people in places like Galilee and elsewhere, they accept Jesus' ministry. But those Jews down around Jerusalem, descended from Ezra's remnant, they look down their noses on all other Jewish groups who live elsewhere. Can anything good come out of Galilee? They say, can anything good come out of Nazareth? That's way up north of Judea. They look down their noses at Alexandrian Jews from the great Egyptian city of Alexandria, where some of the greatest Jewish scholarship was being done at the time. But that didn't matter to Jerusalem Jews. They looked down their noses on them. Genealogically, if you wanted to come and converse or debate in the temple with Jerusalem Jews, you had to be able to present your genealogy going back at least 10 generations, showing that no outside blood has come in 10 generations' time to make you who you claim to be. And very difficult. And so Jesus goes down to Jerusalem, and for the next 3, maybe 4 months, he's dealing with that mentality. Am I saying this plainly? Does everybody get what I'm talking about? It's not a mentality that you'll run into with other Jews elsewhere. Back in Ezra and Nehemiah's time, they really made it genetic, almost in a racial way. Ezra and Nehemiah, you can read those 2 books. They banned anyone who had married a Samaritan woman who may or may not have Israelite blood in her. If you didn't divorce your wife and illegitimize your children by her, you forfeited all your lands and all your inheritance and were driven out. They made it, ethnic purging was what they were after. And when I say this, I don't mean all Jews, but that group under Ezra and Nehemiah, and that was the attitude. And Ezra's big prayer when he met somebody who wanted to worship in Jerusalem, but they had mixed blood in them. Why, Nehemiah ran out and bit a guy and pulled his hair and kicked him and drove him out. And Nehemiah's prayer after incidents like this would be, remember me, O Lord, for my righteousness, and remember them for their unrighteousness. And he was just talking about having mixed blood and daring to come near the holy precincts of the temple. And so that kind of snooty mentality among the Jerusalem Jews, it existed among both Pharisees and Sadducees. Am I making sense? So, and I'm not even putting them down. I'm just trying to explain what happened. So we're going to be reading John. And John, unlike the other 3 writers, John just says, and the Jews confronted him, and the Jews lied to him, and the Jews wanted to kill him. It's an unfortunate writing, but what John means, you see, John was a Galilean Jew. When he's talking about the way these people in Jerusalem treated Jesus and react to him, John just calls him the Jews because that's what people down there call themselves. We are the Jews. The rest of you so-called Jews aren't really the Jews the way we are. You all understand now? So when we come to John saying, and the Jews wanted to kill him, that doesn't mean all Jews everywhere in the world. It just means that particular group. And not even all of them, because we're going to see right now as we start reading that some said, Jerusalem, some said he's a prophet, and others said, no, he can't, he's got to be full of the devil. So even among Jerusalem Jews, there was much debate about Jesus. Now with that introduction, let's get into what's happening, beginning with verse 11. Jesus shows up at the temple or in the temple precincts during the week-long Feast of Tabernacles. And the Jews therefore sought him at this feast and said, where is he? So a lot of people were thinking he'll be coming here, you know. And there was much murmuring among the multitudes concerning him. Now I'm reading from the RV. The King James is on the screen. You can hear me and look at that, or close your eyes and just listen to me, or shut your ears and just read that. Yeah, whatever. Now some said concerning Jesus, he is a good man. And others said, nay, but he leads the multitude astray. Yet no one spoke openly concerning him. So it's all quiet murmuring. But no orator got up and made a speech about this guy Jesus of Nazareth, for fear of the Jews. But when it was now in the midst of the feast, about halfway through the week, Jesus went up into the temple and actually taught. So he gathers a group around him and speaks as an orator, a teacher, out loud. And the Jews therefore marveled and said, how knoweth this man letters, having never learned? Well, we've already found the answer to that. Jesus was a rabbi, and Nicodemus, who'll come up in this story later, had respected him as a rabbi and told him so, you know, master or Rabboni. And he wouldn't be that if he hadn't been educated. But maybe he wasn't educated in their school down there. You know, they referred to all Galileans as ignorant and uneducated. Because they thought you had to come to our school, you know, and learn things our way and from our point of view before you're educated. They would later say this about Peter and John in the book of Acts in Jerusalem. These are ignorant and unlearned men. How do you know? Well, because they're from Galilee. Everybody from Galilee is ignorant and unlearned. So they're now saying this about Jesus. Jesus therefore answered them. And I won't go through all of it, but he says, this teaching is not mine, it's my Father's. My Father gave me what I'm teaching. And I don't say anything unless I've heard it from my Father. We're going to skip on down to the end of verse 19, if you'll go there. I mean, you can read all of his words, but I want to get on with the story. And he said, did not Moses give you the law, and yet none of you really keeps the law? Why go ye about to kill me? Bingo. There's the first time Jesus has said, you guys want me dead. And they said to him, the multitude answered, thou hast a devil. Who goes about to kill you? I love that they said, ain't nobody trying to kill you. You got to have some kind of devil to be so paranoid as to think they want to kill you. And it goes on. Let's go down to verse 25. Jesus talks a little bit more. And in verse 25, then said some of them in Jerusalem, is not this he whom they seek to kill? So it's very well known, even though they deny it before Jesus. And lo, he speaketh openly, and they say nothing unto him. Can it be that the rulers indeed know that this is the Christ? Now that'll come up again in John a couple of times. Even the high priest will make an admission just before Jesus is crucified that yeah, he probably is the Christ, probably is the Messiah, but still we can't accept a Messiah from Galilee. We can't accept this kind of a Messiah. But they go on. He speaks openly. Don't the rulers know that this is the Christ? Howbeit we know this man whence he is. We know he's from Galilee. But when the real Messiah comes, the Christ, no one will know where he is from. Well, where do they get that crazy idea? Some teaching, some commentary, some rabbi had made for them that the Messiah was just going to pop up out of the earth somewhere, come down out of the sky. But yet we have Micah in the Old Testament saying that the Messiah would come from Bethlehem Ephrathah of Judah. And of course that's where Jesus was born. We have it that he'd be called out of Egypt. And of course he was by an angel. His parents took him as a child to Egypt to hide out from King Herod. And an angel came in Egypt and told them, they that seek your child's life are dead. You can come back now. And they came back. And that also he'd be called Nazarene. So, yes, there are prophecies that say where Jesus came from, but these people didn't know about it. Anyway, Jesus, verse 28, Jesus therefore cried in the temple teaching. And he says, you both know me and you know whence I am, where I am from. And I am not come of myself, but he that sent me is true, whom ye know not. You don't even know God. You talk about him all the time, and you love to wear a little badge that says you're God's special treasure, but you don't even know him. If you had known him, you would receive me. Verse 30, I believe, says, then they sought to take him, arrest him, but no man laid hands on him because his hour was not yet come. And but many of the multitude believed on him, and they said, when the Christ shall come, will he do more signs than those which this man has done? And the Pharisees heard the multitude murmuring these things concerning Jesus, and the chief priests and the Pharisees sent officers to arrest Jesus. Now when the officers show up under the temple porch, there Jesus is teaching a crowd of worshipers. Let's go down to verse 35. They hear Jesus talking, and the Jews are saying among themselves, let me say what Jesus said. Go back to verse 33. Jesus said, yet a little while am I with you, and I go unto him that sent me. You'll seek me then and won't find me. And where I'll be then, you can't get there. So the Jews therefore said among themselves, where is this guy going to go that we won't be able to find him? Will he go into the dispersion among the Greeks? That means among all those Jews that live out in those former Greek nations. Will he go and teach the Greeks? What is this word that he said that we're going to seek him and won't find him, and where he is, we can't come? Now, on the last day of the feast, Jesus stands up and cries and says, if any man thirst, let him come unto me and drink. He that believeth on me, as the scripture hath said, out of his belly shall flow rivers of living water. I'll turn every man who comes to me, I'll turn him into a fountain of life for others to drink from. And then they'll be turned into fountains of life. That's a metaphor Jesus is talking about. Verse 39, but of course he spake of the Spirit, which they that believed on him were to receive. For the Spirit was not yet given, because Jesus was not yet glorified. Some of the multitude, therefore, when they heard these words, said, this is of a truth the prophet. Others said, this is the Christ. See, the two great prophecies, one was Moses said, there will come a prophet like unto me, and when he comes, he'll be the one you'll listen to. And then the idea of the Christ, the anointed one. See, Christ is a Greek word, comes from the Greek word chrism, which means oil. In Hebrew, the word for oil is mesa. So the one who has the oil poured on him, the anointing, the anointed one, in Hebrew is the Messiah, the oiled one. And in Greek, it's the Christos, the one who's got the chrism or oil upon him. So sometimes in some versions in the New Testament, you'll read the word Messiah, and other times Christ. I'm just telling you, it's the exact same word, two different languages. And let's see, where am I? Verse 41. And this is of a truth the prophet Moses told about, the one like unto Moses. And others said, this is the Messiah. But some said, what? Will the Messiah come out of Galilee? Have not the Scriptures said that the Christ comes out of the seed of David from Bethlehem in the village where David was? So they don't even know. Jesus hadn't gone around telling everybody, you know, I was born down the road here in Bethlehem and circumcised here in the temple when I was born. He hadn't even been telling people that. He just lets them, he wants them to figure out who he is by his words, his spirit, and the works that he has done. He says, they'll testify of me. Jesus doesn't go unrolling his genealogy and showing, you know, that he's a son of David, son of Abraham. He wants people to look at him and listen to him and decide who he is. So there was, verse 43, so there was a division in the multitude because of him. And some of them would have arrested him. But again it says, no man would lay hands on him. Why were they scared to arrest Jesus? He just stood there talking, and they really wanted to do it, and he told them so, and they said, ain't nobody wanting to arrest you. And the people were murmuring, saying, isn't that the guy they're wanting to arrest and kill? And so why don't they arrest Jesus? He has worked no miracles of violence against anyone. Unlike Moses, unlike Elijah, unlike several others we could mention of the Old Testament that worked miracles of violence, calling God to kill people and kill enemies and kill sinners and so forth, Jesus has never done anything like that. Why are they afraid of Jesus? What do they think he's going to do if they were to arrest him? It's simply told us by John his time was not yet, so they couldn't. They simply wanted to and couldn't do it. No man laid hands on him. So you remember the officers that the chief priest said, go up and listen to him and find cause to arrest him. The officers therefore came back to the chief priests and the Pharisees in the Sanhedrin hall. And they said to them, well, where is he? Why didn't you arrest him? And the officers answered, because never a man spake like this man. What are you talking about? You couldn't arrest him because of the way he was talking? Nope. We couldn't find anything he said to arrest him over. No charge could we bring. And the Pharisees got angry at these soldiers and said, are you also led astray? Have you men noticed that none of us rulers believe on him? No Pharisees anywhere believe on him as far as we know. But this multitude that's in town for the feast, they don't know the law, and they're accursed. Here he's cursing out-of-town Jews. They're accursed. They don't know the law. And one guy stands up. Nick at night. The guy who came to Jesus by night a couple of years ago. He stands up in the Sanhedrin, being one of them. He's a member of the counselor. We read back in John, John 3, that Nicodemus was one of the rulers of the Jews, meaning not only a Sanhedrin member, but an officer, one of the 12 officers over the Sanhedrin. And Nicodemus stood up and said to them, and that's the same Nicodemus that came to Jesus before, being one of them. And he said, does our law judge a man except it first hear from himself and know what he doeth? In other words, how can we pass judgment on him when we haven't brought him to trial? And if we bring him to trial, there has to be a charge. And even if there's a charge, he's given time to collect witnesses who will stand in his defense, while prosecutors collect witnesses to accuse him. And we would hear every matter if it came up to the high priest's court. It wasn't decided by the lower Levite courts because they had a whole system of appeals. Why would we sit here, being the Sanhedrin, and pass judgment on him when we don't even have a charge against him? And the other rulers of the Sanhedrin, spoke disparagingly about Nicodemus. They answered and said unto him, are you also from Galilee? They know he's not, but you sound like one of those stupid Galileans, Nicodemus. Search and look, for out of Galilee no prophet arises. Well, they're wrong about that too, aren't they? Because we read, as we search the Old Testament in our Bible class, we're just coming up to the era of the kings, and we'll see that there are a lot of prophets raised up in the north, in Galilee, Naphtali and Asher and Zebulun and Ephraim. There are prophets raised up. But it is true that most of the prophets, even in the Old Testament, come from Judea, but not all. Now, we come to verse 53, and the story changes. And they went out every man to his own house. But Jesus left and went up to the Mount of Olives. Now remember, this is early October. He's going to stay there until December at least, end of December, Hanukkah. And where does he sleep at night? When he comes back to Jerusalem 4 months after December, in April, it'll be Passover time. And he'll spend a week in Jerusalem every day until he is crucified at the end of the week. But on that week, coming up in the following April, he will leave the city every evening at sunset, just before the sun sets. And he will go down that southeast road out of the city, cross the Kidron Valley, and then there's a big hill. The road goes uphill, and halfway uphill it splits into a fork. If you take this fork, you'll go up to the top of the Mount of Olives, which is just almost due west of the city. Due east of the city, east-southeast kind of. But if you take this curve, you'll go up to the top of another promontory, and there is the village of Bethany. And it seems that last week of his life, Jesus will go to Bethany and stay at the home of Lazarus, or maybe his friend, the former Simon the leper, who had brought Jesus into his house also in Bethany. Jesus will stay up there until Thursday night when he decides to go to the Mount of Olives and be arrested. Well, pardon me, that Wednesday night he'll give the Mount of Olives discourse and sleep up there, and then he'll go back again on the night of the Passover to the Mount of Olives, and there he'll be praying and will be arrested. Am I making sense to anyone? But coming back to this previous fall, before all that, we see him also going out in the evenings down that road and up to the Mount of Olives. And stays up there apparently, camps on the Mount of Olives under those olive trees. And early in the morning he came again. But of course it could mean that he went up the Mount of Olives road and then turned off to Bethany and went and stayed with Lazarus. We don't know, but the point I want to make, and I want you to just get a good picture of the graphics of this. Jesus does not spend the night in Jerusalem. Why? Because they go about to kill him. And he goes out in the middle of some group every evening and goes and sleeps elsewhere. So he comes back the next morning into the temple. All the people gather around him, and he sat down in the temple and taught them. And the scribes and the Pharisees bring a woman taken in adultery. And they set her in the midst, and they say unto him, Master, this woman has been taken in adultery in the very act of adultery. Now in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such a person. What then do you say of her? And this they said, tempting him that they might have whereof to accuse him. But Jesus stooped down and with his finger wrote on the ground. And now, got two problems with this. Jesus is sitting under Solomon's porch in the temple, which is a place people can come and gather and discuss Scripture. He's sitting there, and they come, they bring a woman they say is caught in the very act of adultery. No, they can't bring her in there. So what it means is that they're in the street in front of the temple, at the steps of the temple. They can't take that woman in there. Not if they've declared she was caught in the very act of adultery and she's under indictment. And Jesus is going to stoop down and write in the ground. They keep those marble floors in the temple swept regularly. Ain't no dust to write in. So Jesus comes out. He leaves his group he's teaching with, and he comes out to meet these men who have set up a trap for him by bringing this woman. And they quote Moses, and they say, you've got to tell us what to do. And really, what is their question? We want to hear you answer a yes or no question. You seem to always sidestep our questions with other questions. Well, we know that tactic. Give us a straight answer on this one. This woman was taken in the very act of adultery. Now, we have heard you, Mr. Jesus of Nazareth, preach about God's forgiveness of sinners. And we have seen you before. And up in Galilee, our people have come back and told us that they saw you sitting with publicans and sinners and saying things like, whores and harlots would go into the kingdom before some of us would. And we're wondering about all that stuff. Now, here's one right here. Do we forgive her if she's found guilty? That would be against Moses. Moses said she should be stoned to death. And of course, if Jesus says, yes, let's forgive her, then they'd turn and scream at him, then you need to be stoned to death. Listen, everybody, this man defies Moses. But on the other hand, they reason, if Jesus says, yeah, we better do what Moses said. If you can prove she's guilty, let's stone her to death. Then they would also turn to the people and say, you see, you all call him a great teacher, but when it comes right down to a decision to be made, he has to come back to Moses. Well, we've already got Moses, so what do we need him for? Either way, they're hoping they can shut Jesus up and force some kind of argument where he would say something that would be damnable and accusatory to him. But instead of answering, and he could have answered in some brilliant ways, by the way. He could have said, as Brother Terry, you and I were talking about this a little while ago. He could have said, well, you can't have a trial. If she has really been guilty, then you should have had a trial for her at the court. Which Levite court found her guilty? Was there a due process of law? You're just bringing her here, and what you're saying amounts to a rumor because she hasn't been found guilty. If she had been found guilty, she'd have already been stoned. And this isn't a judgment place. They're right in front of the temple here. Have you brought her from court or what? Where'd you find this woman in the act of adultery? Jesus could have asked him all that. Secondly, if we are going to have a trial, let's go to the Levite judiciary and have a trial. But you can't even have that, can you? Because what Moses said is you've got to bring both adulterers, the man and the woman. Put them both on trial, the man and the woman, and they must both give answer to the accusations, the man and the woman. And if they are found guilty, then both of them, the man and the woman, must be taken out of the camp and stoned to death. Both of them, the man and the woman. You've only got the woman. Who the man? Where the man at? Well, apparently it was a setup, right? This was some known hussy, some harlot that they went and found and paid some guy to go just deep enough into the tryst and then run, and as they would come in and grab her and arrest her. This is the most off-balance thing, and Jesus could have pointed all of that out, but he didn't. He wanted to show something other. And he stooped down, not only at their feet, but it's hers also. And he writes in the dust. 3 times in the Bible we see the finger of the Lord writing. The first time was over here coming out of Egypt at Mount Sinai, and God wrote in stone. The second time was 1,000 years later over here in Babylon. Way out here to the east in Babylon. The night Babylon fell, just hours before Babylon fell, the finger of God comes and writes on the plaster wall of the palace from which the whole world was ruled until that night. What God wrote in stone with his finger in Moses' time, we have it word for word twice in the Bible, the 10 Commandments, so-called. What God wrote in plaster 1,000 years later on the plaster wall of Babylon, as Daniel interpreted and Belshazzar trembled, we have those words told us twice in the Bible. But the third time we see the Lord writing anything, what Jesus wrote, John tells us that Jesus wrote with his finger, but does not tell us a word of what he wrote. Not twice, not even once, do we know what Jesus was writing. Now, why is that? These are the only 3 times we see the Lord writing himself with his own hand. Well, always just with his finger. Stone, then the plaster wall, the fingers of a man's hand writing on the wall, and now with his finger here. Rock, then something a little softer, plaster, and now just in mere dust. Is this making sense to anyone? What he wrote in stone, the 10 Commandments. You tell them what it said, Moses, and then I want you to make a special box of acacia wood, and then overlay it with gold, and put these stone tablets in that box, and then you'll have a big lid of solid gold and put it over the top and then sanctify it, and after that moment, any man that touches this box will fall dead. Even priests can only carry the box by slipping poles through the rings. Nobody can touch this box. And so they would parade carrying the Ark of the Covenant that held God's own handwriting in stone inside the Ark of the Covenant. They would parade and blow trumpets and shout and say, no people's ever been like us. We've got the very handwriting of God here. And yet not one of them was able to open the box and read it or look upon it. Not one of them was holy enough to actually live up to the 10 things written on those tables of stone. But going about carrying the ark, and God commanded them to do that, but they did not realize that he was commanding them, in one sense, to take part in a terrific hypocrisy. We've got the writing of God with us, but not confessing, yet we can't live up to it. So what it turns out is that that's an indictment against man's inability The very fact that it was written in stone, what God really wanted to do was write it in their hearts. But they wouldn't let it come into their hearts, so He wrote it on stone. Why stone? Again, it's an irony and a condemnation against them. This stone is hard, but it'll take my writing. Your hearts are even harder than the stone and won't take my words. And later Ezekiel will say, you all have stony hearts. God wants to take out your stony hearts and give you hearts that He can speak to. The second time God writes with His fingers, of course, I've said, is in plaster. Plaster is man-made stuff. Do you mind if I touch the wall, Brother James? I don't want to leave fingerprints all over our pretty wall. Man-made stuff, as I've said, it's the palace where the world is ruled from that place. And what does He write on there? The words are from an unknown tongue. He's got 1,000 princes there representing 1,000 different languages. They come. That's all of the princes of the whole empire of Babylon, from Ethiopia to India, are there. And yet the language written there, none of them know it. Somebody said it was Hebrew. No, there were people there that could read Hebrew. It wasn't Hebrew. What was it? Mene, tekel, upharsin. They didn't even know the alphabet that was being used. Daniel came in and looked at it and he said, I can interpret that. Because God spoke to him. Daniel had the gift of interpretation of tongues. And he interpreted it. He says, it says three things. Number one, your time's up. Your days are numbered, and today's the last number. It wasn't just talking to Belshazzar, because that is said to every human also. Your days are numbered, and your final day will come. I'm going to skip over the second thing he said and go down to the third one. Everything you've got, everything you've ever had, everything you put together, everything you built, you're going to lose it all tonight, and it'll go into the hands of others. In this case, the Medes and the Persians. Well, he's not just talking to the king of Babylon. He's talking to every one of us. No matter what we acquire in life, how much education or money or property or position or buildings, it's all going to go to somebody else one day. And we can't take it with us. So your time's up. You can't take nothing with you. But the middle one gives the reason why. And the reason why is tekel, the balance. You've been weighed in the balance, and you're found wanting. There's a reason, and that is also said to every man, for which of us has not been found wanting before God. So what he's saying now, you know, what he said in the Ten Commandments was just for the Israelites. What he says on this wall now is not only for the Babylonian Empire, but for all humanity. So there's a condemnation, and there's the judgment for the condemnation. Ten Commandments condemn us. The writing on the wall passes the judgment sentence to us. Am I making sense? The verdict, you're guilty. The sentencing, you've been weighed in the balance and found wanting, therefore your days are ending tonight, and you lose everything. Now, if that's the only kind of thing that God writes, I don't want to read any more of His books. It's a little scary. But now we have God in kind of a human form as the Son of God, Jesus Christ, squatting down in the street before the great temple and writing in the dust, and they all lean over to see what He's writing. What does He mean by that? And whatever He writes shakes them up. What do you think He writes? Does He quote from what was written in stone? Thou shalt not commit adultery. Does He quote from Daniel's understanding? This woman's weighed in the balance and found wanting. Or is Jesus writing something completely different? Here's what it says. In other words, we have to guess. But let me tell you something. He's writing in dust now. Not stone, not plaster. He's writing in the stuff you and I are made of. We ain't made of stone, and we're not made of plaster. We're made of dust. Is this a symbolism that He wants to write something in us? Why don't you just put your hand and say, Lord, write something in me. You know, Paul said that. Said to his believing friends that he was writing to, he said, don't you know that you are our epistle? Written by the hand of God, not with paper and ink, but with the Word and the Spirit. You are God's living epistles to be read of all men. God wants to write in that dust that is you. And next verse, verse 7, please. When they continued asking Him, come on, stop that writing. Tell us the answer to our question. He lifted up Himself, and He said unto them, He that is without sin among you, let him first cast a stone at her. Now, I love this. He who is not condemned by what was written in stone, and he who is not sentenced to death by what was written on that Babylonian wall. Is there any one of you that's not weighed in the balance and found wanting? Is there any one of you that's never coveted? That's the 10th of the 10th commandments. Any one of you never done that? Well, I'm not asking that all of you stoners be perfect. Just one. You Jerusalem Pharisees are the world's most holy people. Shouldn't be a problem for you to produce just one from among your group that we can examine, put him on trial. Let's have a trial of just one of you, and let's see if this person is without sin in any way. And then he can throw the first stone, and I'm sure some of them are, well, what's this about the first stone? Moses didn't say nothing about who's going to throw the first stone. What's he talking about? And Jesus, had they said that, would have said, well, you didn't go ask Moses what to do with this woman. You came and asked me, and so I'm giving you my opinion. All of you can throw all the stones you want at her after someone throws the first stone. And the first stone must be thrown only by a person who is proven among us to be perfect and without sin. So that's my answer to your question. Next verse. And he said nothing more. Stooped down and continued writing on the ground. Man, I wish I knew what he wrote. John, why don't you tell us? Because he's writing in us. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, he's writing in you. And since we are each distinct, he writes it a little different way in each of us. But what is it? It's his gospel. That God loves the world. And he sent Jesus Christ to perish for us, that we wouldn't have to perish if we just believe in him. That God really is not looking for a reason to send you to hell, but he's looking for an excuse to get you into heaven. And God, Jesus Christ is God's excuse to get you into heaven. Right here at the foot of the stairs of the holiest place in earth, the greatest thing the finger of the Lord ever wrote is being written. And each man has to come and see for himself as it's written in the dust of his own life. Redemption. Some message of redemption for others that should be read by others when they meet us all the time. Jesus stooped and wrote on the ground. I've got 2 minutes to finish this next verse. And they which heard it, being convicted by their own conscience, went out one by one, beginning with the eldest, even unto the youngest, the last. I just love this. Took them a while to all disappear and leave only that woman standing there. The accused woman. They left her standing there with Jesus. Now, why did the oldest leave first? These Pharisees. One of them said, look, I don't know how long this is going to take, but you know my old lady, she pitches a fit if I'm late for supper. Y'all let me know how this turns out. And he's gone. And another one just remembered he's got an appointment with the podiatrist to get his ingrown toenail pulled out, and he's gone. And another one says, you know, I'm just, why don't you go? Why don't you be the one to be examined and cast the first stone? Well, you know I could, but I don't want to put myself up like that. Every one of them knew that someone of them knew something about him. And the oldest leave first because they've lived longest and have done more junk than the younger ones have. And eventually they're all gone. And Jesus is left alone looking at that woman standing there. Next verse. And Jesus lifts himself the second time, and he sees none but that woman. And he says to her, woman, where are those guys that brought you in here accusing you? Isn't there any man that'll condemn you or stand as a shaitan by your side prosecuting you? Next verse. And she says, no man, Lord. Now, she has read what he's written, and she's probably beginning to guess this is the only man who is pure enough to cast the first stone. But I'm going to bet that he doesn't want to cast it, and he doesn't want to accuse me. So she said, no man, Lord, including you, Lord. There's no man left to accuse me, and I got a feeling you won't, even though you could. And he answers that supposition on her part, tacit, unspoken statement that he reads in her heart. He answers and says, well, it won't be me either then, lady. Neither do I condemn thee. Go and sin no more. I'm over time. That business, go and sin no more, is only told to two people, both in Jerusalem. First one was back in John chapter 5, where the man at the pool of Bethesda was healed and then went and turned Jesus in to the Pharisees when they wanted to know who healed you on the Sabbath day. And the man went and told the Pharisees, said, that's the guy right there who made me break Moses' law and carry my blanket on the Sabbath day. And they wanted to go and stone Jesus. Jesus, when he speaks to the guy, he says, listen, pal, these Pharisees are rough to deal with. Go and sin no more, lest a worse thing come upon you. Now, he's not saying that as, okay, you've been forgiven. If you ever commit another sin, God's going to put cancer on you or leprosy or maybe just drop a rock on your head. God's going to do something a lot worse to you than this. No, that's not what he means. He says it's these Pharisees that came and threatened you. And if they catch you breaking one of their rules again, they're going to even be harder on you. So when he says don't sin, the word there used means don't break their rules. But he's not saying God will put a worse thing on you. Now this is the only other time that business of go and sin no more is mentioned. And Jesus does not add the second part to this lady unless a worse thing will come upon you. He just looks at her and says, go on and live your life. Try to live right, but you've already learned today you can be forgiven. Next verse. Now that's it. Stop right there. Well, thank you for your attention tonight. We're going to continue with Jesus in Jerusalem. Some interesting stories will happen while he's in Jerusalem and the Jerusalem area. The next one is a great theological question. Why in the world is a man born blind? And there'll be a story coming up about it that we'll look into. But that won't be next Wednesday night. It'll be Wednesday after next. I'm going to be out of town for a week. Thank you for being here tonight. God bless all of you. Give Pastor James a big hand as he comes.
Let's all go ahead and stand to our feet. I don't